Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Green. I'm the clerk of Greens List at the bar. Welcome this morning, and thanks very much for getting up early and coming. For those of you who have been to our breakfast briefings before, we're doing things a bit differently this morning in that we have three presenters who'll split up the functions, one of whom is a fellow practitioner with you, a solicitor, Paul Horvath. Second on my left, you're right. Paul has a business which specialises in sports law and employment law, and Paul has very kindly agreed to come along this morning and talk with Mark Raymond, who's here on my left, about the way in which Paul has developed his practice and how Paul had a vision, set some goals for himself, and then how he went about achieving those goals and creating the practice that he wanted. And if you see the CV, which is in the handout there, Paul has a significant practice in sports law, particularly, which includes winning awards, Australian New Zealand Sports Law Association Award for Best Paper on Sports Law Topic, acting on behalf of high-profile AFL people and the Best AFL Club Richmond, where Paul has the great honour to actually support the Tigers as well. He's a director of Harness Racing Victoria, solicitor involved with the Commonwealth Games, World Swimming Championships. He's on a variety of tribunals. And none of that has come about by chance. It's come about because of Paul's planning to achieve those things, and it's a very interesting story for us to hear. So firstly, between now and 8 o'clock, or a bit after 8, Mark and Paul will discuss that. Paul has to leave for work reasons at the breakfast break. Therefore, questions of Paul we'll have just before we break. Then, secondly, we have Kath McCarthy, who's sitting here in front of me, and Mark Raymond. Kath and Mark are both business development consultants, both of whom consult to our list. Kath with a legal background and a psychology background, Mark with a business background. And so in the second half, Kath and Mark are going to discuss the key considerations and the key skills needed to build the niche that you may or you want to achieve. So please start by welcoming Paul Horvath and Mark Raymond.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. We're going to start with some footage of Paul just to get into the mood. So just bear with me for a minute. Paul and his friend David Kosh. And Paul, you were involved in that case, weren't you? This is the biggest sports case in the last 10 years, probably. And you had a role. Can you talk a bit about your role and how that came about? I think that'd be interesting for people.
Sure. So, with the assistance of Michael Green here, many years ago when I'd completed one of my first Master of Laws subjects, which was in sports law, I wrote a paper around disciplinary tribunals. I had a connection with Richmond, a small one, but I spoke to Michael Green about providing a reference. We'd had professional dealings. And so I wrote to the club and said, look, I'd like to do some of your work. I'm cutting the short story long. And so I started doing some work. It took a while to get the work with Richmond's AFL tribunal work. And then the fellow from there who left along with a coach and then started to work at the AFL Coaches Association approached me in about 2012-13 to start doing some work for them. And through that, primarily, I got the work representing Bomber Thompson.
Okay, fantastic. And you, when you said you approached Richmond back then about doing some work, and it took a while. I mean, I wasn't going to ask you about this, but I might now, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you, how did that come about then? Because I think one of the interesting things, one of the challenges for all of us who have a profession and want to generate work is getting work and getting that first opportunity. So, yeah, would you mind talking a bit about that?
So, I guess in about 2002, I was doing a certain type of work which was primarily criminal law. I was feeling a bit burnt out as a result of that, and I came across a postgraduate course at Melbourne University in sports law, and I enrolled in that course and started doing some of the subjects. and that gave me this idea, wow, sports law might be an interesting field to get into. So I started studying the subjects, and one of the things that I decided to do was to try and maximise what I could get out of the course. So one of the objectives I set myself was to use the papers. So in most of the sports law subjects, you have to do a 10,000 word written paper for each subject. And I thought, I'm going to try and either link into professional organisations or get papers published to get my name out there as a expert or someone who's known in that field, in that particular area. And so I did that. So as I said, I did that with a disciplinary tribunal paper. There was another paper I wrote about good governance practices in metropolitan football leagues. So for any of you who know, there's the Eastern Football League, the Southern Football, all of these. So I wrote a governance paper around that, but it drew from sports in the US and overseas in the Bundesliga and so, but had that sort of practical local knowledge, and I delivered that to people at AFL Victoria, and they put it on their website and so on. So it was really trying in a practical way to say to these people, well, here's some work that'll help you with a view to getting work. So, and for those of you that know the expression coming in off the long run, it's really that type of situation where you're not going to get work straight away from it, but you've got to get your name out there. People will later on recognise your name when you're coming back asking for work, or you're in a different networking setting or what have you, and they'll say, oh yeah, we've seen your paper or what have you, so you've got a bit of credibility when you get to those points.
What attracted you to sports law to start with? Because you had a criminal law background, and I know you now do employment law as well, right, as part of your practice. But what was it about sports law that thought, yeah, this is really, could be a lot of fun and there's a potential opportunity for me, and I want to really build that niche in sports law? What was it about it?
I don't think there's any magic to it, and I think a lot of Australians love their sport, and it was pretty much as simple as that. It just seemed like an interesting area, and I wanted to do something interesting, something different. I think also over the time that I've been looking into and studying and now working in the area, I think it's an increasing area, and I think you can see from taking probably women's examples, which I think has shown the most growth and probably will show the most growth in relative terms in the near future. So women's cricket are the highest paid professional female athletes in the country, I understand, as a team sport. Women's netball's grown a lot as well. So if you measure that over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been significant growth in those types of areas. But obviously we know the media rights in the AFLs and the NRLs and so on. So I guess the fact is that there's more work there for people like sports lawyers, and naturally if you can get the work, that's great, but you've got to position yourself. And for a boutique firm like mine, I guess I've also got to know the sorts of work that I can realistically get. I can't compete with an Allens or they used to be called Middletons. I can't think of their current name.
Yeah. I'm not sure. The big firms.
The big firms who do your media rights work. I can't do that sort of work, and that's not my background anyway, so I don't try and compete with them.
Yeah. I was going to ask you too, in terms of when you set up your practice, we've had a couple of conversations. One of the things that impressed me about the way you went about it was I think from pretty early days, you set about declaring some things you wanted to achieve in the business, over perhaps a 5-year period, and you were pretty rigorous in your planning approach. And then over the journey, things have, you tweak things as you go, but you're very strong on saying, putting it out there in terms of this is what I want to achieve in my practice, these are some measures of success and so on, and this is what I think is realistic and so on. So there was a pretty rigorous planning process, I reckon, that you went through. Can you talk a bit about that? Because in Kath and my work, one of the things that we do is helping people with planning, and sometimes people might, can be sort of resistant to the process, and it can be seen as hard work and a bit of a grind, with potentially, people not sure whether it's such a good idea or not to go through that process, but you went through the process and it's worked for you. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the simple message is that it's hard yakka, and you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got to do the hard work, and there's no avoiding that. And I think we were talking about this earlier, Mark, just saying that, probably as a kid I can remember looking up at whatever professionals, whether it's lawyers or whatever, thinking, well, they're smart and they're doing all these things. But at the end of the day, you've got to do the hard work, you've got to do the study, you've got to get your degree and so on and so forth. So you've just got to go through that process. In terms of your professional situation, I guess for me, one of the key aspects is that I thought about what I really wanted to do, and lots of people in this room, I imagine, are busy in their practices and so on, and some of you might be, many of you might be very happy with the work that you're doing, but I imagine at least some of you are here because you're thinking, well, how can I get into another area? And I guess the work that you're doing is probably going to come to you quite easily because you're pretty good at what you do and experienced in what you do. But for me, I didn't have any contacts in sports law. I wasn't a great sports person myself or anything like that. And so it's just mapping out all the steps through the process. I was knocking on the doors of people who, lawyers who had some standing in sports law and so on, saying, what do I do, and so on, and people are saying, get on committees of sports clubs, sit on tribunals, just get the runs on the board and so on, so you've got some experience. I was the volunteer solicitor, so pro bono, for the 2006 World Swimming Championships. I approached them and said, do you want a solicitor? And they said yes. I did the same for the 2007 World Swimming Championships. I got paid cases out of both. I got a trip to Switzerland for a court of arbitration for sport hearing out of the World Swimming Championships. So unless you put yourself in these positions, and if I hadn't put my hand up, it may be that there would have been no representation and these cases would have gone on with people unrepresented. So it's creating opportunities for yourself, I guess.
One of the things that we talked about before was getting your name out there and doing sort of marketing and business development as part of that. So you've got, what I hear is you invested lots of time and energy in terms of building up your legal capabilities and skills and writing papers and doing the getting your name out there in that way, but also investing a lot of time in building your skills in that area too. So you had experience there. One of the things in our work in terms of working with solicitors and barristers is the business development process. And some people, I don't know why, but some people don't like it. We can't figure out why. But but do you enjoy the business development side of your work, or would you prefer to be doing the work? And can you talk a bit about that and how you deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a tension with that, because I think as a natural reaction, I'd probably prefer to do the work that I want to do rather than necessarily the business development, just because it's harder to get a result when you're doing the marketing side of things. And I don't know if I mentioned earlier that I came across a business advisor through a connection who was Telstra Businesswoman of the Year. So I thought, oh gee, I'll approach her and see if I can get have a coffee with her and just hang on every word. And she said, have a chat to my husband who's a business advisor, and I've been working with him. And he said to me, you're probably 1 in 10 of your connections might come off, and also it might be years before something comes back to you. So it really is sort of putting in the efforts, which many times don't come off, and you've just got to put it out there and be patient. So I guess that's a challenge, whether I'm impatient or people are impatient in sort of wanting more quick results. So that was one step in the process, but also, as you said earlier, mapping out the plan and saying, look, this is where I want to get. So perhaps setting some targets for 6 or 12 months' time, or 2 years or 3 years, and then perhaps working towards those, perhaps adjusting those targets depending what happens, how busy you are and so on. But, you know...
And those targets, Paul, in the planning process were some financial goals, some client goals, some types of work you wanted to be doing, like a whole range of things. Was there any sort of magic in there in terms of the things that you wanted to cover in your planning process and why? Or was it pretty much around, you know, these are the areas that I really want to focus on and sort of judge my success by, and I'll work towards those, yeah?
Yeah, I guess there was a whole range of targets. One of them at a more basic level was having a work-life balance. I've got young kids who are 8 and 10, and so obviously you want to have your family life as well. And so that was an important target of, I think, 3 key objectives that I set when I had the business in the first place. And so sometimes that's a challenge between, you know, at the end of the day, you want to get the big cases in or whatever, and obviously you want to do that work, but at the same time, you've got your family. So I think keeping those sorts of things in mind has been important. In terms of the targets and growth of the firm and growth of the work, these days my work's at around 50%, give or take, is sports law work. And that's still growing. I guess my objective was over time to be doing something like 70 or 80% of my work being sports, so I'm still working towards that. But I'm pretty pleased with where I've gotten to, and it's just chipping away and building those contacts and referral groups and so on.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And, you know, you said that, or 70 or 80% was the goal for sports law. One of the questions I think we get a bit is, should I, you know, carving out your niche by definition implies that there's one thing, right, that you do. And I think that can be a bit unrealistic in terms of saying, you know, this is the one thing I do. I'm talking about for practitioners who are practicing as lawyers. And often it can be important, or maybe this is a question, do you think it's important to have multiple strings to your bow, if you like, in your practice, so you can ride the bumps of the economy and the work in different areas? And yeah, because I know you do employment as well as sports law. Was that a deliberate strategy for you, or something more as a not a backup, but you're wanting to have a few things in terms of your practice that you could offer, so the work kept coming in and so on?
Yeah, sure. I guess there's different ways of thinking about how you might want to get into the sort of work you do. So if I'm talking to a graduate from university and they're saying, well, I want to get into sports law, well, I might sort of say in the first instance, probably go out and get a couple of years of commercial experience in a firm, and then you've got a good foundation to perhaps go into either a sports organisation, and that's an in-house type of role. There's some of the key sporting roles available and growing, including in-house lawyers, CEOs, executives and so on. So there's a number of roles around that, or even in terms of moving into a firm such as mine or other types of law firms. So there's some of the key foundations that you can get. But for, I guess, the majority of people, and certainly I imagine people in the room who are settled in the type of work that they're doing but might want to transition into something else, then, as you say, I think it's, as was the case with me, I'd been doing a lot of litigation and criminal law. You try and transition, so obviously you still need to have your billable hours and that sort of thing up. So you've got to maintain that side of your practice at the same time whilst building up other work, so that in part your general work can supplement your other work. In other words, you can take on some pro bono projects, you can do some part-time things and so on, and you can still earn an income. And then as you're building up your other work, then, you're building up your preferred niche work, then you've still got other work for those quiet times, and so it's a slow process of building up. But that way you're still fully busy, but you've got to sort of go through that slow process to build up. And, you know, my transition process, I looked at an area that I thought would complement the sports work. So I focused on employment law, and there's a lot of employment law in certainly professional sport and even non-professional sport. There's a range of aspects of that that involve contracts and employment contracts and so on, so it fitted in with that.
Okay, cool. We're going to throw open to questions in a minute, and then we're going to have some breakfast in about 5 minutes or so. So I'll just get you thinking about any questions you want to ask Paul, but I might ask you one more, Paul, which was if there were one or two things that you think made the biggest difference to you in terms of building the practice in the way that you have, that you, yeah, that was, I'm really glad I did that, or that was really important for me. What would they be? So I know it's a tricky question to answer because it's a complex process, what happens, but if there's anything that's standing out for you as things that were important for you in the development of your practice.
I guess it's not a specific thing or task or anything. I guess one aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is just making a bit of a decision around a direction that you want to go in and then following that through and riding the bumps. And we were talking earlier about the fact that my wife will tell you that I've come home at times saying, I'm sick of this, I'm just going to go back to doing what I used to do, I'm sick of trying to put myself out there and get the work in and so on. And then a week or two later, I got this case in today, I got this good case in or whatever, and she'd laugh at me or whatever it might be. But the fact is there's always something around the corner. And I guess probably a key point I would make is resilience. And that is that you've got to roll with some of those punches and you've just got to take a few chances, because it's easy in one sense to stay within a comfort zone and just do, and I'm not being critical of people who are doing what they want to do and balancing their own lives and so on, but I'm saying for those of you who sort of think, gee, I'd like to try doing a different type of work or whatever, then it's stepping outside that comfort zone and pursuing that a bit, and you're going to have some disappointments, and you've got to throw out 10 fishing lines and you'll only get a bite on one of them. By following that through, so I guess the point on that is resilience and persistence, basically.
Yeah, right. And I also listened to a decision. You made a decision about something you wanted to do and you put it out there and you went ahead and had a real go at it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any magic to it. I mean, this stuff on TV and the media and so on, I've got a website, Sports Lawyer, one of my advisors said, get this name Sports Lawyer, it's not gone yet. So I've got sportslawyer.com.au. And so when something's on in the media, they Google search and I get a phone call and the newspaper or the TV or radio might want to interview me or something like that. And so I was lucky that one of the firms I was at did media training, and so I felt reasonably comfortable making those sorts of comments in the media. And the way I look at it is that sometimes it's a pain in the butt to do the media stuff because it's draining. You've got to be on, you've got to know what you're talking about and not say silly or rash things. You've got to, and you've got to be accurate. But at the same time, you know, the people at Channel 7 are saying to you, short, sharp answers, just, you know, keep it simple for the audience and that sort of thing. So you're trying to distill legal concept into quite digestible things. So, but my attitude was, that's free marketing. So it's all these decisions, and there's no one simple answer. You've got to do what suits you in terms of what's going to get you and what's your strengths, your own strengths in terms of getting the work in that you want to do.
Excellent. Questions? Questions of Paul. And there's a microphone, I think, that's roving mic.
I don't think I need a mic. No, sorry, you go first.
What sort of marketing budget did you set yourself when you started up? So did you sort of say, look, I'm going to spend 20 grand on a business advisor or marketing or whatever? Because back then you wouldn't have had any social media, there wouldn't have been websites or anything like that to the extent of today. So did you sort of say, this is how much I need, this is how much I'm going to spend?
That's a really good question, and the answer is I had no budget. So I had the assistance of my wife when I started. She created a logo on the computer, and that became my business logo that's still there today. And I think we printed the letterheads on just on the printer at home, and all I needed to buy was a computer to start the business, and then we built a website. So there might have been a small budget for the website. There was no social media, as you say. But I think that if you put a budget aside for those sorts of things, and in fact I'm going through a review of one of my websites at the moment to make it tablet friendly, so that's a fairly big process. And also working with digital marketing people on AdWords campaigns and things like that. There's expenses there, so I'm going through a positive, something like what you're talking about at the moment to revamp and generate a whole lot of new work. But I definitely think that if you do that, then that sort of generates interest, and I suppose it would be targeted if you're getting the professional advice from people that know, and I think digital media and digital marketing is a big area, and if you can get the right advice, I think you'll go a fair way. Does that answer?
I think that's the thing, you just don't know how much money you need to start up, and you don't know whether you need to save for 3 years to have the money to do it, or whether you can just try to keep your expenses low and just give it a shot. It's sort of hard to know what to do.
Well, I didn't have a specific expense at the start. I just did the things that didn't cost me money. I just attended events, went out and visited people, had coffees with people. As I say, I wrote a paper for a large professional sporting organisation and then started to have dealings with them and so on. Didn't cost me anything. And so it's just, all those, as they say in sporting terms, the 1%ers. And but if you've got a marketing budget, then certainly I think that's a really good kickstart as well.
Can I follow up on that with you, Luke? Luke is at the far end there who handed the microphone across. Luke does all of that sort of stuff for us, and Luke organised this morning and every other morning we have. So I stand up there and look good, but that's the bloke who does the work down there. Luke, you go online and look at a lot of these things for us and look at people who can provide the sort of services you're talking about. Can you find relatively cheap providers to give advice in digital marketing, to give advice on search engine optimisation, etc., etc.?
Yes, you can. There's plenty of companies that do it in regards to smaller companies, which we've used for our own website for Google keywords and the like. So yeah, if you're starting out, there's smaller businesses right up to larger businesses. My wife does the same work at Census, so you can go to the corporates or you can start quite small, but it's worth doing because Google search is where your business needs to be found.
Michael, you had another question too, didn't you?
I was just interested, Paul, what importance would you put on having a business coach? When you hear those sayings that successful sports people all have coaches, in all walks of life there are coaches, therefore, why don't business people or professionals have coaches? How important is you, or how much value do you put on the coach?
A lot, a great deal of value in the coach, because obviously we go through law school and we're trained to think like lawyers. I'm running a business, I've got no idea how to run a business, and so a business coach comes in and says, do this, this, this. He sets my budgets, he helps me with setting targets, he helps me with marketing. This guy, he's a fellow of the International Institute of Independent Businesses, which they do coaching and so on as part of their role. And he brings in colleagues who are specialists in marketing, and so it was one of his colleagues that came up with the sportslawyer.com.au website. Buy that, right, we've got that. And just a whole lot of things that I don't know about, just because I'm not trained to do those things. So it's thinking in a different way, and I guess we have to wear different hats. I mean, those of in the room who, I guess, have any management role in a firm have to manage people and those sorts of... So it's wearing a different hat to just working on files, and sometimes it's hard to wear too many hats. So if you can reduce that, in my case, having a business advisor, that's enormously helpful. So I don't have to worry about these decisions. I give them off to someone else and just accept his advice. So, for example, at the start, we went through a whole planning session. So I've got a vision statement for my business just around the key concepts. I've got the 3 key objectives, which might be, let's say having a successful firm, but one of them also being to have a work-life balance. I think we wrote an 8-year plan at the start, and that's a work in progress, and all of these sorts of things. So going through all of that progress and having targets to work towards was part of the process in working with him, which I wouldn't have done. And so he pushes me, I guess. Sure.
Yeah. I've got a loud voice. Just in terms of those fishing lines that you said you're throwing out and direct approaches, because direct approaches are quite difficult, you know, just writing a letter or asking someone for coffee, whatever. Out of those types of things, did anything stand out as being more helpful, actually getting face-to-face with someone as opposed to writing a letter, or what, in terms of those?
Could you repeat the question? Yeah.
So I guess the answer is it depends a bit. So
I know you talked about the expertise. You obviously establish your expertise through the writing of papers and so on. So that obviously set a good base for these things. But then there's obviously got to be some kind of personal interaction, rapport established, and I just wanted to know if you could talk about those things. Absolutely, and it's about converting that expertise into clients. And that's the hardest thing in all of this process, because, for example, I wrote one of the papers, I think it was on good governance, and then I thought, like, I'm trying to establish a national practice wherever possible, because obviously there's a lot of national sports, and I got a list of national sporting organisations, and I wrote to 150 of them or something, saying, giving them a summary of a paper that I'd written on good governance, and I can come and talk to your organisation about good governance practices. And I think I got like 2 responses, and one of them, a guy sort of said, come up and have a coffee with me in Sydney, and out of that I got a massive defamation case which ran for 3 or 4 years, and he was an ongoing client for 6 or 7 years. So, you know, just little things, as I say, the 1%ers can lead to, that's been a solid avenue of work in following that process through. In terms of face-to-face versus letter writing, I'll probably defer to Mark in terms of an answer to that. I don't know. I think you've got to try everything. I think you sort of, sometimes you're going to have more energy or enthusiasm to try harder things, and other times you're going to be sick of it and you're like, oh, I don't want to try the hard thing. So you've got to adjust that to yourself as well. When you're feeling a bit daring, you might try some of the harder things and they might come off. But other times, you know, if you're sort of quite low on energy and you feel like, you know, I've been knocked back so many times, you take one more knockback and it just takes the enthusiasm. So it's sort of adjusting those types of efforts. So sometimes the written ones, it's just sending a letter out there, and I guess it's hard to know whether people read things and all those sorts of things. So in short, face-to-face is more effective in the sense that you can speak to a person, but at the same time, it's with the face-to-face stuff, it's getting to speak to a person when they're able to listen. So what I mean by that is that they might get, organisations might get approached, or whatever your client base is, many people who court them to get their work or whatever. Sometimes it's just luck. Like, you just happen to speak to a particular organisation when they need someone, and that's your 1 in 10, because it's a timing thing. Other times people might keep your CV to one side, and I've had an example of that in the last 3 months, where someone's kept my CV for 6 or 7 years and they've called me and said, oh, can you do some work for us? So it's just really hard to know which ones are going to come off and when. So there is a follow-up question to that. Now that you're established, do you have, as part of your current marketing strategy, ways to maintain your current clients, and, you know, in terms of providing further education to them, or contacts, or more contacts and so on? Yeah, certainly. So we roll out seminars. So in both sports law and employment law, we have seminars that we try and roll out every 2 or 3 months. Michael's attended our employment one.
We have also started some sports law seminars, and indeed in both of them we've spent quite a bit of time developing booklets. So we've got a 50-page booklet on key employment law advice for small to medium businesses. So it's got, you know, unfair dismissal, the national employment standards that you need to know. And then we're doing the same with sports, so a good governance guide, how to manage your financials so that you don't fall foul of audit laws, etc. You know, so developing the books, delivering the seminars, so it's keeping that presence, and also having newsletters that you circulate to your clients, so having database lists of clients in different areas. So.
And I can vouch for one of those things. I'm on a committee for a sporting club, and I've not done it before, and I talked to Paul about that, and Paul and a few of us are new committee members, and Paul sent us some really useful information about governance and about managing risk on a committee, which was, I think, you know, probably 4 or 5 pages, but really helpful, and it had your name on it, obviously, because you created it. And that's like, to me, that's an example of one way of being really helpful for people who we may not brief any work out, but you know, but certainly others who you give that to will, and that's just, yeah, it just resonated with me when you said that. I think it's time for a break. But before we go, I just want to say, Paul, for me, I've learned a lot, and I've been very inspired listening to you this morning, and I think other people in the room have been as well by the number of questions, and I think it's been very enlightening. So on behalf of everyone here, and Michael and Kath, want to say thank you very much for not just today, but for our previous conversations getting ready for today. You've been terrific, and I think a great source of learning and inspiration for many people, so thank you.
Cool. Thanks.